God gives. Let's say it one more time, one more time. God is. God gives. So I give thanks, yeah, for all my blessings. God gives me everything I need. God is my source. God is my power. God gives me everything I need. So I give thanks for all my blessings. God gives me everything I need. God gives me everything I need. Last time, God gives everything I need.
Thank you, Tony. Repeat after me, if you would. Something wonderful is happening through me right now. Something amazing is happening through this church right now. Look at someone and say, you're wonderful. Somebody else and say, you're amazing. Doesn't that feel good? To be told you're wonderful and amazing? So I want to let you know, we don't teach scarcity, but it seems like there's a scarcity in new church jokes, so I'm doing a repeat today. But it's a classic, and it ties in with what I want to talk about. There was a church, and they had come on some hard financial times. And so the pastor got a creative idea, and one morning he stood before the congregation at the beginning of the service, and he said, I just believe there's someone here that can give a $10,000 gift today. And just to encourage you, whoever gives that gift, you get to pick the hymns for today's service. Some of you already are jumping to the punchline. Wait a minute. And there was a little church mother in the back row, and she stood up and she waved her checkbook and she said, Pastor, I've been a part of this church for decades, and it has always been there for me. I am here for this church. I will give $10,000 today. The church applauded. He welcomed her down to the front of the sanctuary, and he said, Sister, bless you. Thank you so much. Now you get to pick the hymns. She turned and faced the congregation. She said, I pick him and him and him. It's an oldie but a goodie. There was a miscommunication. He meant one thing, she meant another. And that does relate to what we're talking about today. What we teach in Unity is that the presence of God is everywhere, including in our lives. We are the perfection and the wholeness of God revealed as a human life. And yet we sometimes misunderstand it. And we don't always live fully into it. God said one thing, we heard something else. So that's what we're talking about today. This is part 2 of our 5-part series, Removing the Obstacles that the Vision May Be Revealed. Last week we talked about the compelling vision. What is it that is being called for in your life to expand and to evolve into the next greater good, the next chapter of your own being? Reverend Fairland is doing that in a big way. Stepping out, moving down to Rockport. It may not be quite so dramatic for you, and it might be, but there's something that is being called for you because we do not believe in static. We don't believe in status quo. We are an evolutionary teaching. Nobody ever gets all of God. There's always more for you to evolve and become, and there's a particular way in which it happens through you. That's the vision of your life. And last week I talked about the fact that a vision is not something you accomplish and check off the list. It's an expanded version of yourself. It's something you become and embody. So starting today and for the next 4 weeks, I'm going to hope to give you practical tools that will help you remove those things that would seem to stand in the way of you moving into that vision. Today we're talking about affirmation and denial. Next week we're going to be talking about forgiveness. So you know who you need to invite next week. I just know who that is. After that, we'll be talking about those harmful habits, those things that rob us of our time and our energy. And then the last week, we're going to be talking about how to work with our body rather than against it. Our body temple is being an obstacle. We don't want to remove that, our body, but we want to work with it in a good way. So today, we're talking about affirmation and denial. These are the two primary practices that unity is known for. They are ways that we can take the principle of oneness, of unity, and put it into what we say practice. It's like we're going to do something that will begin to shift us and grow us and heal us. Before we get into what those two practices look like, I want to give you the philosophical underpinnings on why we teach them and why they work. We are a Christian tradition. We follow the teachings of Jesus. And there is one way in which we are very different from traditional Christian theology. And it's this. Traditional Christian theology is called dualistic. It believes that God created everything and then somehow, for some reason, separated its own nature from reality. That's called the fall of man. It's called the fall from grace. And it's taught that it was by choice, but God made perfect expressions of its own nature, and then somehow that was imperfect and chose not God. It doesn't quite make sense to me philosophically, and it didn't make sense to our founders and to many ancient wisdom traditions. That doesn't work. So what we do not believe in dualism. We do not believe that God could ever separate its own nature and perfection, its love, its power, its presence from anywhere. But if you look around the world, you can see that there are plenty of places where it doesn't feel like God's presence and power are available. You've probably had experiences in your own life where it doesn't feel like the possibility and the hope of God is there. So what does it mean? Why do we teach something different than that? Well, dualism does make sense because through our five senses, we could say, God ain't here. But I want to give you an example of a way that our senses have lied to us. We live on the coastal plains of North America, and it is very flat here. Have you noticed? Someone told me once that the greatest elevation difference in the city of Houston is 30 feet. If you ever lived in the mountains or any place where there are hills, it's not like that here. It's very flat. And if you go out someplace where you're just out on the prairie, how does the earth look to you? Flat. For most of human history, it was believed that the world was flat. And so when people would come up with a cosmological model for how it worked, the earth was a flat surface. And if you went beyond the horizon, what happened to you? You fell off the earth. Makes sense. If you look through the sense of sight, that makes sense. It is wrong. With enough perspective, we can now see our entire planet and see that it is a lovely orb. It is a globe, and there is no falling off of the earth because we got a different perspective. And what I want to offer to you is that unity offers a different perspective on this idea of, is God present even in the struggle? The traditional teaching is that somehow God is absent, must be invited through some sacrifice or something like that. And what we teach in unity is that God never, ever is absent. There is no spot where God is not. We just haven't gotten the proper perspective to see it. And that's what we're here to do, is to shift our perspective, to move into a different way of knowing beyond the five senses. We move into the realms of faith. We move into the realms of intuitive knowing, of deep wisdom that is more than our five senses. And just because something doesn't make sense, it may well be true. And just because you have not yet experienced God's presence in the midst of your struggle doesn't mean that it's not true. Unity embraces the teachings of Jesus and of other masters, and we sort of have a window open to Eastern tradition here. In the Hindu and the Buddhist traditions, there is this understanding of oneness, and that's more where we understand, that's what we've come into. We're sometimes called mystical Christianity, meaning that the mystics understand the presence of God everywhere, sometimes called non-dual Christianity or metaphysical spirituality. But what we teach is that the one mind is everywhere present, and our mind is an aspect of it. In Scripture, Philippians 2:5, let this mind be in you that was also in Christ Jesus. And when Jesus said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father, and the kingdom of heaven is within, I believe Jesus was a non-dual teacher. And that we are here to step into this greater understanding of the kingdom of God being present right where we are. It's tempting to be dualistic, good and bad, heaven and hell. But how many of you have discovered God through your own experience of hell? Yeah, that was what Ernest Holmes said, our work is to stand in hell and declare heaven. How many of you have been through those experiences where the struggle felt so real, you felt you were never going to find daylight again, and somehow, not despite that experience, but through it and because of it, some new understanding of who you were and what God is was revealed to you? We reject dualism. We claim that there is only one power, one presence, one life, and it is everywhere. And it is so vast and so powerful and so loving. There is nothing that could say no to God. And so it is only in our mistaken thought that we have experienced the lack of God's presence. I do it all the time. As do all human beings. We have this experience of being here where our senses are telling us, nope, not going to work. God's not here. And the thought of separation is there. But it is only a thought. So what do? Well, I just told you, we know the truth. But sometimes knowing it in our head is not the same as living it embodied in an embodied way in our lives. And so we have practices, ways that you can take the idea of the principle and begin to put it in your life, check it out, test it, try it, and see what happens. Does it sound like a good thing to do? I believe in being experimental with our lives, stepping out, trying these principles, see if it works. My mom has always said that I'm the risk taker in the family. And it served me well. Otherwise, I would still be in that little Pentecostal church in Avan, Oklahoma. I'm so glad I stepped out a little bit. Sometimes what we think of as making sense is actually nonsense. This is from Hafiz, the Persian poet from the 1300s. He says this: love wants to reach out and manhandle us, break all our teacup talk of God. If you had the courage and could give the beloved his choice, some nights he would just drag you around the room by your hair, ripping from your grip all those toys in the world that bring you no joy. Yes, God sometimes is tired of speaking sweetly and wants to rip to shreds all your erroneous notions of truth that make you fight within yourself, dear one, and with others, causing our world to weep on too many fine days. God wants to manhandle us, lock us in a tiny room with himself, and practice his drop kick. The beloved sometimes wants to do us a great favor, hold us upside down and shake us till all the nonsense comes out. But when we hear he is in such a playful, drunken mood, most everyone I know quickly packs their bags and hightails it out of town. Isn't that a beautiful image of God holding us upside down? It's like, no, that's not it. Those erroneous notions of truth, that there is a limited supply of good and there's probably not going to be enough for you. Wrong. That's nonsense. And so what we use are affirmations and denials to move us away from the nonsense of our five senses and into a deeper sense of truth with a capital T. If we're going to do affirmation, have you ever had the experience of doing an affirmation and it just, you're lying to yourself? Have you ever done that? You try, but it's like, I don't believe that for a minute. Part of what may be happening is that there is an underlying belief system. There's something underneath there that might need to be cleared out first. And I don't mean to re-traumatize any of you, but many of you have been flooded recently, Miss Ellen. And, or you've been helping friends who have been flooded. Now, we've been in those houses. And what would happen if instead of pulling out the old dirty, wet carpet, we just put new carpet on top of it? What would happen? It's a terrible idea. I want you to remember that. That's what we do sometimes with our affirmation unless we do our denial first. We're not doing denial. Psychological denial is when we pretend something isn't happening. I've done that one a lot too. I'm talking about spiritual denial, where the thing that appears to be true to our senses has no spiritual truth, and I declare that to be the case. Emily Cady, she is one of the great foremothers of our movement. The New Thought movement, the Unity movement, I'm so proud that the women were there at the beginning. Some of the strongest teachers have always been women in our movement. She was a medical doctor, a homeopathic medical doctor. She became a doctor in 1871. She studied in New York under a metaphysical teacher there. She became aware of Emma Curtis Hopkins, who taught the Fillmores and Ernest Holmes and the founders of divine science as well. And she studied with Mrs. Hopkins. And then she sent an article, completely unsolicited, to Myrtle and Charles Fillmore. And they loved it. They felt the depth of her teaching, and they published it in Unity magazine in 1891. They asked her to contribute more. So in 1892, she created a series of 12 lessons on how we can use these principles and apply them in our lives. It's now been published as a book. It's called Lessons in Truth. And her chapter on denial, I think, is the greatest resource for understanding what this is about. How we deny the apparent human truth so we can make room for a greater divine truth to be revealed. She says this: in our ignorance of the nature of God, our Father, and of our relationship to Him, we have believed that our enjoyment came from external sources, usually from gaining possession of something we did not have. This is so in alignment with Jesus, that we believe that if we can just get the stuff in our life different, then we'll be fine. If I can get the right relationship, if I can get the right job with the right salary and the right car, then I'll be whole. Will never work. And Jesus said it over and over again. Why do you worry about what you're going to wear? Why do you store up treasure on earth? Seek ye first the kingdom of heaven and His righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. And that's exactly what she's showing us here, that we have to deny that idea that our good lies outside of ourselves. She says this: your real life is never sick, never afraid, never selfish. That's who you really are. You're never sick, never afraid, never selfish. And this: one of the methods that they have found will work every time in getting rid of troublesome conditions, which are all the result of erroneous thinking and feeling, is to deny them in toto. First, to deny that any such things have or could have power to make us unhappy. And second, to deny that these things do in reality exist at all. That's power. And when we have that thing that comes against us, apparently, that thing, whether it's a diagnosis, whether it's the loss of a job, whether it's the end of a relationship, whatever it is, and it would appear to have the power to make us unhappy. She says we have to do two things in denial. The first is deny that it has that power. It cannot make us anything. And the second, to deny that it even exists in reality. Now, I'm not saying that it's an illusion. This is where it gets a little sticky for some people. What I'm saying is that it's temporary. You are always creating the conditions of your life through the power of co-creation by directing the infinite flow of creative energy, which is just your birthright, and you're doing it with every thought you think, every feeling you have, every belief you possess. You are creating your experience of life. The first time I heard somebody tell me that in a New Thought church, I did not appreciate it. My life was a mess, and it had to be somebody else's fault. But I began to open to the possibility that maybe it wasn't out there that needed to change. It was in here. And so I began to practice denying that anything out there had any power over me. The first step toward freeing ourselves from our troubles is to get rid of our erroneous beliefs about God and about ourselves. That is the practice of spiritual denial, to get rid of wrong ideas. Why do we have them in the first place? I don't really know the answer to that other than we have elected or opted or somehow been directed to take a human lifetime in this incarnation. We have chosen to show up here on planet Earth, yes, with those parents. And somebody told me once, if it's not one thing, it's your mother. Or father, or her mother and father, and his mother and father, and their parents going way back. We are the inheritors of worldviews and ideas about life based upon erroneous thinking for generations. Our grandparents thought the world was flat. They were wrong. They were limited in their sight. And so these ideas that come at us of scarcity and of people being against us and of having to defend, all of these ideas that some of it you weren't taught verbally or consciously, it's just downloaded through the system. This is where we've come. And so everyone is given false beliefs and wrong ideas, and lucky you made it to Unity on a Sunday morning. I'm going to set you free right here. I'm not. I'm going to offer you the tools. You can set yourself free. As a matter of fact, you have to. So you deny any truth. This is what our own Myrtle Fillmore, I just love. The story of her healing is just remarkable. Myrtle was afflicted with tuberculosis at a young age and spent many years believing she was incurably weak and sickly. And while attending a lecture by metaphysician Dr. E.B. Weeks in 1886, Myrtle learned of her innate potential for divine healing through the use of affirmative prayer. She began regularly affirming, "I am a child of God, and therefore I do not inherit sickness. I am a child of God, and therefore I do not inherit sickness." And over time, she was healed of tuberculosis that had threatened her life. Do you hear the denial in her statement? I do not inherit sickness. That is refuting the wrong belief. If you have a belief that you're never going to find love in your life, that is wrong. It is a wrong idea. I reject the idea that I am alone. You don't think there's enough good in the world to go around? Scarcity has no place in my life. It's not who I am. And then once we've ripped out that old idea, that bad, ugly carpet, and we can begin to create space so that we can try on new ideas in affirmation. I am a child of God, as Myrtle said. Myrtle said a little bit more that I just love. When her healing was a process, and she did not give up on day 2 when it didn't work, as some of us have done. She says this, I went to all the life centers in my body and I spoke words of truth to them. That's truth with a capital T. Words of strength and power. I asked their forgiveness for the foolish, ignorant course that I had pursued in the past when I had condemned them and called them weak, inefficient, and diseased. I did not become discouraged at their being slow to wake up. I did not become discouraged at them being slow to wake up. This is where so many of us, we try to take on these practices, and then if it happens slowly, we become discouraged and we quit. But I kept right on, both silently and aloud, declaring words of truth until my organs responded. And neither did I forget to tell them they were free, unlimited spirit. I told them that they were no longer in bondage to the carnal mind, that they were not corruptible flesh, but centers of life and energy, omnipresent. That woman could pray. The fervent and effectual prayer of a righteous woman availeth much. The fervent and effectual prayer of a righteous man availeth much. But you must commit to the practice of telling yourself the truth. And this is affirmation. This is not feel good. Well, it is very feel good. But it's not just light spirituality. This is life-changing. This requires discipline and dedication. One of the reasons that people struggle a little bit with our Prosperity Plus class is because the commitment is so high. There's a commitment to tithing 10% of all income for 10 weeks, to show up for all 10 classes, to show up to volunteer a tithe of your time, 4 hours a week. That's a lot. Those of you who have taken the class and followed through the commitment, what's the result? You're in. You have committed yourself to seeing it differently, and you have experienced the benefit. You have changed. What do you want? If we're going to create a new affirmation to create this vision, that's the first question to ask is, what do I want, or what would I love? Emily Cady says this: desire in the heart is always God tapping at the door of your consciousness with infinite supply. So if you know what you want, you begin to affirm it. The 4 P's of creating affirmations: personal, present tense, positive, and powerful. You create statements of truth that work for you. I now experience perfect health. Every cell in my body reveals God's power and radiance. I now accept my perfect new job. I just did. Here it is. I now accept my perfect new job. I use my gifts and talents in service to the greater good. I am beautifully compensated and I am fulfilled. I am attractive. I radiate the love of God irresistibly. I move with grace and freedom and draw unto myself healthy friendships and spiritual partnership. Break me off a piece of that? Yeah. This is the power of affirmation. And the power is not in the words. It's not choosing the words. It is finding the words that resonate in your soul, that turn your consciousness away from the lack and towards the truth. That's what it's about. You can begin to feel yourself resonate to a different vibration, a new way of being. And let me tell you this, make no mistake, when you step into this, the critic is going to come. That voice of doubt and fear will come. In the story of the Israelites being freed from the bondage in Egypt, the Egyptians chased them. And it will happen every time. And what do you do? So when the voice of doubt comes, if you have done your denial before your affirmation, when you step into this prosperity program and you're ready to do it, and then, oh my gosh, the bills start piling up and you get that, you're never going to have enough. You turn and you say, no, we've talked about this. We're done here. You have no place in my life. Something is happening. Something is shifting. You are not your problems. You are not your disappointments. You are not the divorce or the diagnosis. You are not cancer. You are not diabetes. You are not old age. You are not your money problems. You are not unemployment. You are not depression. You are not loneliness. You are not your fear. You are not small or timid or weak or insignificant. You are the light of the world. When we start living our truth, when we start denying the lie and living who we truly are, people notice. They start talking. They'll say, something's happening over at that Unity Church. Those people, they're shining. You're shining. Something is happening. Can you feel it? Do you feel that possibility, that just little opening? Maybe Michael, God is telling me the truth. I am more than I thought myself to be. Something is happening. I can feel it. Get ready. It's getting bright in here. God bless you.